Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give everybody a few more minutes to log on, and then we'll get started shortly. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Power On webinar hosted by MarketWISE and Etch. It's a webinar on entering new energy markets. Our primary presenters today are going to be Tom Dougherty of MarketWISE and Madelon Kuchera of Etch. I'll give each of them a minute to introduce themselves now.
Hi, this is Tom Dougherty. I'll give you a little bit of background on, I've been in the energy industry for about 30 years. Got started with EDI, working with Westinghouse, and got involved with a group called the Utility Industry Group. If you know what that is, you're showing your age, but we wrote the first EDI implementation guidelines for energy. Worked with a C&I supplier for 9 years, entered 12 states and about 60 utilities, then for a demand response company for a few years, and an EDI billing service provider. MarketWISE provides consulting, training, and information products to suppliers, service providers, brokers, and utilities in deregulated gas markets. We feel that we have a unique perspective in solving problems because we have come at these issues from the standpoint of different stakeholder positions. Madelon?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Madelon Kuchera. I'm president and founder of Etch. Our company, in a nutshell, basically helps companies unravel the regulatory compliance issues, both at the commission as well as the utility level. Everyone on our team has vast amounts of experience working at a competitive supplier, a utility, some of the commissions. I'm personally a licensed energy attorney. We work with many suppliers from the beginning of helping them figure out which markets to enter into, to getting licensed and registered at the commissions, as well as the respective utilities and regional transmission and FERC. We've have just a extensive amount of experience in this industry, and look forward to walking through some of the processes that you need to get enrolled and start beginning marketing within this space.
Okay, thank you, Madelon. And my name is Patrick Devlin. I'm a business development manager for MarketWISE, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. Before we jump into the content, a couple of housekeeping notes. We are going to make these slides available upon request, so if you'd like to get these slides at the end of the webinar, just shoot one of us an email and we'll make sure you get those. And if you'd like to ask questions during the webinar, you can do that using the GoToWebinar functionality. You should see it in your toolbar there, the ability to ask questions. So feel free to ask us questions and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. So now let's jump in. Our starting point for the conversation today is as an energy supplier who is looking to expand their business into new markets. We're going to take you through the major components necessary to achieve a successful market entry and to maintain compliance going forward. We'll follow this process step by step and dig into each item in more detail. So let's start with market due diligence, otherwise known as do your homework. So Tom, why don't you start us off? How can you select a market, and what are some considerations when deciding whether to enter a new market?
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Well, in order to enter a new market, first of all, you need to know what markets are available, which states are open to choice. And these can be for electric, for gas, for both, or for certain subsets of customers within each commodity. Usually there's one or two states that are considering opening or significant changes. So opportunities might be rising in one state while they're declining in another. So the first thing is to know which states are available and which ones have some uncertainty. So what motivated you to pick this market in the first place? Maybe it's a new market opening and you're trying to achieve growth by getting into this new market. And if that's the case, it's very important to enter the market on time and be there so that you have first choice of a lot of customers before they get under contract and for a long period of time. Maybe it's a market change, a regulatory or competitive opportunity, something like Delaware purchase of receivables, which is opening up here shortly, or a market expansion where you're already in a state, but you're not serving customers under all of the utilities. So you want to look at what would be different to add some more utilities. Maybe you had an acquisition and you now have a brand in a new territory that you don't have a lot of experience with and you need to get caught up on it quickly. Or you're an electric supplier and you're looking to go into gas. All of these are very good reasons why you would be entering a market and why you're looking to expand your brand and your footprint. So let's look at a couple of things like some metrics. If it's an existing market and you look at the switching statistics, and you might see something like only 20% of residential customers have switched. And this market's been open since 2002. Is that a great opportunity for residential customers? Or are there some barriers that have kept customers from switching? It's worth looking into. What's the future perspective of the market? Is it choice friendly, or is it under attack to roll back some of the privileges and that, especially on residential accounts? We've got a couple of markets where a lot of legislation is being discussed to basically do that and to restrict and to make it a little more difficult to serve customers in those markets. So in order to have a successful project, the first thing you need a good project plan. Okay, so some of the key things that you want to look at here, areas are the market entry aspect of the project. And you want a complete picture of the market you're about to enter before you start the project. So you look at all of your business functions, you look at your team, and you want to see how they will be impacted. Market entry gets into looking at licensing and registration and certification processes. How long will they take? How much will they cost? Sales and enrollment gets into looking at what information is available to you. How can you get historical usage information to do pricing? What are the requirements of the data on an enrollment in order to get it accepted? What bill options are available? Do you want to do utility consolidated billing? Is purchase of receivables a requirement for you? Do you want to do dual billing? Maybe you want to do a blend of these depending on your customer base. And account maintenance. How do you maintain customer information? You manage rates and manage rate changes, renewals, and drops. So these are all important things to get under control before you get into the project. Okay, another detailed list of things. We're not going to go through them all, but just touching on a few of them. which customers will you serve? Some customer classes may or may not be available to choice. You need to know that before you get in there. There might be a reason why you want to serve low-income customers or net metered customers, or maybe you want to pass on serving them, and you want to know that before enrollment time. What will you offer? Which products are you going to bring to the marketplace? That might be dependent upon how much information you can get in a meter read. Perhaps you have a detailed product and bill ready or information, bill quality meter read information may not be available. So you may need to look at offering other products. How will you sell in this market? Okay, are you going to use internal salespeople, or are you going to use brokers? And you need to have training on any of those folks ahead of time. And how will operations execute? Are you using internal systems, EDI, billing? Maybe you're thinking about doing a change in there and you're going to outsource some things. You need to think all those things through thoroughly before getting started.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Madelon, do you have anything you'd like to add on due diligence before you review the licensing process?
Not really, other than to say I think this is absolutely one of the most critical steps you can do is, and I think anybody who's been through this process understands how important it is to have a project plan and to understand the steps you need to go through, whether it's from, the commission or utility perspective or from your marketing efforts. And just a little bit of due diligence can go a long way. And so to, begin, I think Tom's identified some very good high-level points that you want to be able to go through, and I certainly would just include in that, some of the licensing things you'd want to look at.
Okay, thank you. So why don't we dig into those licensing requirements now? Let's dig into the full process.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Let's go ahead and get started. I mean, when I look at licensing and just so everybody knows for nomenclature perspectives, I use the word licensing, sometimes certification, sometimes registrations, and a lot of times it depends upon the jurisdiction you're in as to what they call it. But, for purposes of this, I'm just going to call it licensing. So these are just basically the steps in most jurisdictions you have to go through. In most cases, they're in this order. I'll point out a couple areas where they're not exactly in this order, but they're basically getting your Secretary of State filing. You need to get your FERC market-based rate. You have the a regional transmission organization registration, such as PJM or New York ISO. You then have your state commission application filings, and then the utility registration. So we're going to talk just briefly about each of these. So the first one's the Secretary of State filing, what is required. And basically, if you're a new company, you obviously have to get registered and become incorporated, or perhaps you want to be a limited liability company. If you already are incorporated, but you want to go into a new state, you're always going to have to go and get what they call a foreign entity registration in that state, and that just means you have the authority to do business in that state. If you're doing business under another name, you would have to do that. The application process, there's usually a registered agent, and this is simply just somebody that's going to get the information in the state. They're authorized to collect legal documents on your behalf. You may need a letter of good standing. Tax certificate isn't part of the Secretary of State filing, but it's something that comes after that. But these are kind of high-level things that you would do with the Secretary of State filing.
Now, does an attorney need to file the Secretary of State filing?
That's a good question, Patrick. Actually, not. In most states, these are online applications, and it's really just collecting the corporate information. Who are the officers? What's the company's name? What's the address? You'll need tax identification numbers, and it's an online process. And as long as you have all of that corporate information available, it's something that a lawyer does not need to get involved. You certainly can use them to do it, but not necessary.
Okay, great. And how long does that step take?
This is a great, easy step. I mean, now it is almost all states are online, where it used to be you'd have to send them off and wait till it came back, and sometimes there was a problem with it, but now it's literally within days, and it can be in a lot of jurisdictions within that day. You just complete the form and you've got it. So, you're well on your way to getting licensed, right?
All right, great. What's step 2?
Okay, well, step 2 is getting the FERC market-based rate authority, and a lot of times you'll hear people just refer to it as FERC MBR. And basically, this is an online filing. It's collecting all of the company information, its ownership structure, who's the officers, services that are going to be offered. They have different categories. Are you a market seller? They ask, do you own generation, transmission, and or gas storage assets? It's a fairly lengthy filing, but it's a step-by-step process. You have to demonstrate whether the entity lacks horizontal or vertical power. Really, this is getting to the question, do you have market power? Most companies don't, but it's a fairly simple demonstration if you're familiar with the process. You also have to do what's called a market-based rate. You have to create the tariff, and you have to file it, and it's part of the application process.
Okay, and if a seller only plans to make retail sales, do they need to make a market-based rate authority to have a tariff on file with the commission?
The probably short answer to that one, Patrick, is no, but probably in reality, and the reason why is because FERC only has authority over the wholesale market. They aren't involved at the state level of the sales that are happening at the retail level. But in reality, what happens is you've got most suppliers will want to be able to get into the wholesale market from time to time. They've got the power. They want to be able to transact there. So you typically will see FERC authority, and in all of your PUC license applications, they'll ask for it. But, if you're not doing anything at the wholesale level, you would just have to indicate in your PUC application why you don't need to show that you got your FERC authority.
Okay, would you recommend using an attorney at this stage of the process?
Well, being an attorney myself, I actually would say on this one, it's not a requirement. It's an online filing. Unless you're really familiar. If you've done it a lot of times and you're comfortable with the requirements and what it means, there also can be some confidential documents that you may not want folks to see. So there's some, confidential filings you have to do, but it's not a requirement. It really, if you're familiar, you've done this a lot, or you have, or a lot of times I've got clients where they say, we want to put it together, and then will you look at it and review it. So, but again, it's not a requirement to use it.
Okay, and how long will this step of the process take?
This one's actually relatively quick too. It depends a bit in terms of the company that's trying to get licensed. If it's a more, they've got a lot of information, they're a large company, they own a lot of assets, there's, some additional steps that they have to take, but typically it's in the 30-day to 45-day range.
Okay, great. On to step 3, the licensing process.
Yes, and this step is basically you're going to get registered at the Regional Transmission Organization, and again, this would be like New York ISO or PJM or the NEPOOL area. So you basically will typically have to show you have the FERC market-based rate authority, and that's just simply filing, here's our docket number. There's going to be a lot of financial credit requirements, a lot of just company information. Again, you'll find yourself putting in the same information for all of these. So I always recommend, have something set aside where, they ask for the company information. You can just cut and paste and put it in there. But there will be a lot of credit requirements, whether or not your company is going to be financing itself, or there going out and getting a credit sleeve. There's lots of detailed information that you're going to have to submit. There's a lot of participation agreements, and you're not familiar with the regional transmission organizations. I mean, there's a lot of activity that goes beyond in terms of how do you schedule power, what's the financial, there's bidding requirements. Some of these RTO arrangements, you have to actually do some testing and, you know, all kinds of different kind of agreements. And you will see variations among the different RTOs of what they require, how long it takes, that kind of thing.
And if you get registered with an ISO such as PJM that covers several states, will you need to refile each time you expand into a new state?
You know, that's a good question. I always tell folks, and I see sometimes like they go into PJM, let's say, for example, and they're just starting out and all they want to do is New Jersey. And so when they do their application, and then I'll even go back to the FERC, it's the same way there. Just say all states, because then you don't have to go back and submit it. But with this one, I would recommend, you know, even if you think you're not going into something else, just say, and you can just, there's a way to notate in most of these, it's like, well, initially we're just going to be in New Jersey, but we would like the ability to expand. And so once you get the PJM agreement authorization, then you would be able to go into another state at a later date and not have to go through. So you're shortening the process if you do it at the very beginning.
Okay, and would you recommend using an attorney at this stage?
This one's very similar to the FERC one. If you're not familiar with these, there's a lot of contracts and documents. There's a lot of legal, you know, agreements that you're committing to, especially from a financial perspective. And there's a lot of other people in your organization that you're going to have to get involved, especially from the finance and risk management perspective. So make sure that they are involved in that process. They understand those requirements. They understand the commitments that they're going to be making as part of becoming a member in the regional transmission organization.
Okay, great. And how long is this step going to take?
You know, this is really going to vary by the RTO. Some of them are very short, 30 days. Some of them 60. Some of them a little bit longer. And it's a lot of times too, I find companies, it becomes a little bit overwhelmed if you haven't ever done it before, or if it's a couple of the RTOs are a little bit more difficult and require a bit more information. And but if you get familiar, or you can find a company that can help you that's gone through it, you can really shorten the process. You don't have much way to change how long it takes them to review it, other than making sure it's all complete. And then, you know, most of these organizations have a set timeline by how long it takes them to, and how long they have to go ahead and approve the application, as long as it's complete. But, you know, typically I tell clients, you know, expect around 30 to 60 days.
Okay, great. And on to step 4 of the licensing process.
Yes, and this is the commission license application. And here, I guess from the very beginning, want to note, in most states, this would be step 4, but in a couple states, and the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head would be New York. In New York, you go get the commission license before you get your RTO license. So these are good things to know. You know, you don't waste some time and start doing the New York registration, and then they say, well, wait, you know, that's not how it works here. So in the commission application is typically step 4 after you've got your FERC and RTO. But so what are you going to do in your PUC application? Across the board, you know, the information, again, you're doing a lot of who are the officers, what's the contact information. I've got legal newspaper notice publication, because in some states, for example, Pennsylvania, you actually go and publish in the newspaper that I'm coming into the state. Our supplier wants to enter this state. You post that in all the newspapers, in all of the utilities you want to serve, and there's so many days it's got to be posted. And then when you file your application, you file those, and it's actually a proof of the or newspaper publication showing that you did do it. So that's part of the application. So some people file the application and then they hear from the commission in Pennsylvania where they say, oh, wait, you didn't do your publication. So it's good to know in these states, and that kind of goes to Tom's comment early on about the project plan. I mean, before you go into state, look at the PUC licensing requirements, understand the general steps. And we've got some documents that lay this out, tell you, here's the bond amount, is there a newspaper publication, that kind of thing. So that would be something I would know ahead of time, because if you don't, you've just delayed it because you didn't realize until later on. You're going to have to just show that you've got the prior licenses at FERC and the RTOs. You're going to have to show financial, managerial, and technical experience. Every PUC license has this. And this really is laying out all your resumes. Who are the experts doing all of these different things? And a lot of times you can rely on outside companies as your expertise, but you'd have to so state it, because you can't, if you, for example, technical expertise, and they're asking, well, who's doing your operational and your billing, and they look at the resumes and the key people that you put, and none of them have any experience in that, a red flag will be raised. So, you just want to be able to understand how do you best, show that you have all of the expertise that you need. Sometimes, like New Jersey, there's an in-state office, or maybe there's an employee requirement. Again, another due diligence that you want to know up front. And again, we've got some documents that we could easily identify, okay, in this state, you're actually going to have a physical employee, and it's more than just a registered agent or something. So these are kind of good things to know. They're always going to be asked, are there lawsuits out there against the officers? Many states will ask about your complaint statistics and what's the status of those complaints. Are they resolved? And you'll see varieties among the states as to whether or not you have to do this. In some states, for example, if you're going to do residential, they'll say, give us a sample of your contract. Give us a sample of your marketing. Give us a sample of your training. A lot of them do customer care, and because that's the commission's interaction with your company. And I just tell folks, absolutely understand, you want a good faith at that customer care, and they want to know who is that person. They'll ask for their name, their phone number, but in many places they'll say, show us your customer care handling process. How do you handle customer complaints? And they're looking at, did you look at our state rules? Do you understand that, in this state you had 2 weeks to respond, but in the new state you're applying, you have to respond within 3 days. And you don't want to put your other state's information, because it'll be very obvious to them that you didn't read the state rules. So another thing that, that points out really is, do a quick look at what's required in the states of the rules. And the application will give you a good inkling of, okay, what are some areas I need to really look at, because you're going to be putting, in all states you have officer certifications and affidavits. And these are very simple. They're a form, and it's just the officer of the company signing it. But make sure you understand what you're doing, because they're saying, we have read, we agree, and we will comply with all the commission rules. And most states will identify all of these different rule sections, or some will just make a broad statement. I've read, I will comply, I understand all of the rules. And, that's part of the due diligence of making sure, have you read those rules, and do you know what you're signing up for?
Is there typically an application fee for this part of the process?
That varies. There are a lot of states where there is an application fee. There are also, in many states, bond requirements. And you'll see that vary in the bonds at the commission level. Sometimes you have the bond at the commission, and other times there is no bond required at the commission, but you have to have it at the individual utility level. So again, that due diligence of understanding, and we've created documents here too, laying out, this is the bond amount, here's the licensing fee. So, that I would put in the very front when Tom was talking about, here's the project plan, and, really understanding, what the state requirements are, know that up front. So you're not surprised. And every once in a while we'll get a client that'll be surprised, like, what? We have to get that size of bond? You know, I'm not sure I wanted to do that, or if it's both. And so it's better to know that up front.
Okay. And is an attorney required for the application and the commission?
No, there's no legal requirement that attorney do this, and you know, some states it's pretty easy. It's a very nice form. In almost all instances, you're going to be doing exhibits and attachments. In most instances, you're going to do a set that's a confidential, and you need to make sure you mark it such. And in some states, you actually have to petition for the right to say this is confidential information. And in those instances, you probably need to have an attorney assist you, because it's actually a legal pleading requesting confidential treatment. But, you know, you also can use a company like Etch or a law firm to review the application, and just they're familiar with that state. And I typically advise, if you're not going to use a law firm or a company such as ours, you know, have somebody look it over and make sure, because the more complete, the more accurate, the faster it'll get through.
Okay, great. And how long is the commission license application?
Yeah, unfortunately, this one's all over the board. You know, you've got some states that it is a statutory requirement where they have to do it as long as it's a complete application. If they don't act within 30 days, it's approved. And, you know, I'm thinking of a state like Ohio or Connecticut. You've got other states where there's no time in which they have to approve the application, and that can, you know, go out to 180 days, even if it's, I've seen some instances where there were absolutely no changes or requests made to make changes or updates in the application, but it still took, you know, a very long time to get it through. And that's usually dictated on the commission staffing and how many people they've got working on these things, as well as the commission's own agenda. Sometimes they're in a gigantic rate case or something, and they'll keep pushing off everything except, you know, the rate case, and you're in the queue to get approved, and yet there's not much you can do about that.
Okay, great. And on to the final step of the licensing process, utility registration.
Yes, and this is the utility registration, and in your application, you're almost always going to be asked, you know, not only what customer classes are you going to serve, but also in what utilities do you plan to do business. And I usually advise clients, first of all, just say all of them. There's no penalty, because then you don't have to come back and redo your license application. I see a lot of companies not do that, and they're saying, well, I can't just make that change and write the commission a letter. And I go, no, unfortunately, in most states, that's filing a whole new application. So just like when you go to PJM or FERC, say all of them, I'd recommend the same at the utility level. And, you know, then at the utility, there's just a lot of documents you're going to have to sign. And there, in some states, there will be bond or letter of credit or parental credit documents you will have to do. There's several different utility agreements. These are billing agreements, enrollment agreements, EDI agreements. I will note with the EDI in most states, you have to do a very preliminary EDI test. And that's really just to say, you know, we can talk to each other, you pass that one. But it does not involve all of the things that Tom's going to talk about in a bit as we move forward. But, you know, it's, and I also I have a lot of clients will say, I don't like this agreement, I want to change it. And it's important for everybody to understand these are actually tariffed. These agreements have been approved, and the utility can't treat one supplier different than another supplier. So you don't have any chance to negotiate these agreements. You just have to sign them and agree to abide by them.
Okay, and are you using a lawyer at this step of the process?
Typically not. It's important that, you know, who's ever responsible for these different documents, that you share them with them and they understand it, and somebody's read over it and say, okay, yes, we can do that, because you are committing to a lot of different, you know, things. So, you know, whether it's the enrollment agreement or it's the billing agreement or there's the financial agreement, you know, you want to make sure that somebody's looked at them and, you know, understands what's in them and what they're committing to do.
Okay, and how long for this last step?
Typically this is a relatively short period too, and it's going to depend upon the utility, and even within a state. Some are better than others at doing these, and some of them it's rather quick. But I typically say it's a reasonable to say you can get it within 30 to 60 days. But again, these are averages.
Okay, great. So look at the timeline altogether.
Right. So it's you can tell it's kind of hard, and Tom and I are going to talk at the very end of from beginning to end, the licensing as well as the all the other steps that you have to do before you can actually get out marketing. But, you're looking at, typically you're at about a 30 to 60 days in most jurisdictions. On the short end, it probably falls more between 30 and 90 days.
Okay. And Tom, are there any other timelines we want to be aware of at this point in the process?
The one that Madelon touched on a little bit is the EDI certification process, and that the supplier, as well as if they're using a service provider, will need to have some certification with each utility, and it can vary from state to state and utility. But the thing we'll get into a little later is making sure you understand what those requirements are, and if there are any advanced notification time periods to get into a testing queue that will impact your project plan.
Okay, great. And we have some discussion on the reporting requirements as well.
Yeah, and this is just real quick. After you get licensed, companies sometimes forget because they're not serving customers yet. There's still a lot of things to do, but they get the license. But immediately, the second you're licensed, there's reporting requirements and obligations, and if there's any changes within the company, whatever. So be aware of it. I tell clients always, get yourself a calendar, understand all of the reporting requirements that you have to do, put it on your calendar, and we create documents for clients that lay out if you've got in FERC, here's your requirements. If it's at the RTO or if it's at the commission, just make sure you calendar all of those and you understand what those reporting obligations are.
Okay, and what about license renewals?
Yeah, and this one would be another one that I would put on your calendar. It's a requirement. Not all states require a renewal application, but the three here that I show is New York, Ohio, and New Jersey. The good news about New Jersey, sometimes we don't have any good news about New Jersey, but very recently we've got wonderful news about New Jersey. They just recently passed a law, and basically you're required to do a renewal filing, and it's every year. That's one of the most strict ones, where Ohio is every 2 years, New York's I think 3 years, but in New Jersey it's now, instead of filing a whole new application, it's just a form to fill out and really identifying any changes that were submitted. So that's great news, but you want to make sure that's on your calendar, because if you don't meet a filing requirement, I tell everybody that's the one thing you want to meet all the time, because you're on the commission's radar. They know if you didn't file your required report.
All right, thank you, Madelon. So now moving on to the next section, let's dig into the EDI operations a little bit. So Tom, why don't you take this? I hear a lot about the importance of EDI. Can you give us an overview of the EDI operations?
Sure. It's essential to have a detailed understanding of the transaction exchange for each market, and not only the technology of the transactions, but how it impacts the business processes. And before I dig into this real deep, I just want to emphasize one more time to really pay attention to everything that Madelon just went over, because if you don't do a good job on all of that, you will never get this off the launching pad. You don't start with a transaction exchange until all the licensing and certification stuff is done. So, okay, so EDI is not just a technical issue. You may think, hey, we have an agreement, we've outsourced EDI. Well, that's good, and the technology to take your data and turn it into the required standard to communicate with the utility will be covered. but you need to look at your business applications and say, how am I going to extract the data in order to create the feed that my EDI provider needs to create legitimate enrollments and get the right amount of information on them? What's the timelines for getting these enrollments out for each state? Certain states have unique requirements, like Connecticut has something called a name code that's on a bill, and if you don't include that on your enrollment, it will fail. Meter reads come in electronically, but not all meter reads are the same. Are you going to get interval meter reads? Are you going to get summary meter reads? Do you have a choice as to if you want summary or interval, and can you do it by account, or is there a default? How long does it take to get paid? You know, your understanding is that you're going to get remittance information maybe in an EDI 820 transaction, but you know, what's the schedule at which that information will be coming to you from the business perspective? How often will you get paid, and you know, what's the time frame from the time of the meter read? So these are all areas that you need to understand how the business process interacts with the EDI process.
Okay, and Madelon, would you like to talk about some additional regulatory requirements for any of these processes?
You know, really from the EDI perspective, I mean, it's more at the utility level, and other than, it's important to get this right, because, you know, if your enrollments are, you know, failing or you're having problems with it, you're going to hear from the commission. So do it right the first time.
Okay, great. And so now let's move on to some enrollment documents in specific. So Madelon, would you like to kick this conversation off?
Yeah, and we're talking about enrollment documents, and this first slide, I hate to scare anybody, but what are we talking about? We're talking about the contracts. We're talking about, you know, all these different documents that you need. And, you know, it's nice that you've got a contract that's from New York and that you want to use it in a new state, let's say New Jersey, but the commission has rules as to how these enrollment documents need to look at. So, you know, absolutely read the rules, you know, absolutely have your attorney look at your contract document and make sure that the new state you're going into, I mean, there are a lot of fines out there that companies have gotten into because their enrollment documents didn't look, they weren't, didn't meet the state specific requirements. So, you know, do it right up front, and you can take the same template. It might just need to be tweaked. There's certain things you can't include, or there's certain language you have to say. You know, there's a certain font size it has to be. This has got to be bolded. You must disclose this particular, and you must say it in this way. I mean, there's very specific requirements. Just make sure your enrollment documents meet the commission rules. And, you know, here we're talking about, it's not just your contracts. There's also a lot of states require you to do a contract summary. Some states include also a letter of agency. You might have the environmental disclosures that you have to make in your contract or on your website. New York has something called the Customer Bills of Rights. Every state has different kinds of enrollment documents. And these are documents that you're going to give the customer. And so just make sure that, in, you know, this picture here is, we've just actually created documents where you go through line by line. Yes, all of our enrollment documents include the required information.
Okay, and if an applicant is required to file these documents with the application, does this mean the supplier needs to have its customer contract completed before it begins their application process?
That's a fair question. You know, a lot of times the company at this stage of the game, they're just getting ready, and when they file at the commission, they don't quite know what products and services they're going to offer. You know, it's a little early in the process. But so at the application phase, you're usually just doing, a lot of times they'll give you a form template, and you just want to make sure it looks like their template and it includes the information that is required. And then really they're also just testing you. Do you know the rules? And do you know the requirements? Later on, once you get licensed, you'll probably go fine tune and tweak it. Once you know, oh, this is the price we want, or we want to do a fixed product, or, you know, here's a green offer, and so agreements, you would have to use the basic information and then tweak it depending upon the particular product offering.
Okay, and Tom, what operations and process considerations do we need to factor in when it comes to enrollments?
So we're going to bounce back to the transaction world here, and really what you need to know is when you're sending out the enrollments, what's the detailed content that needs to be in the transactions? How much lead time do you need before the meter read in order to gain the customer in the next billing period? Some states have what we call accelerated switching, and you can switch either on the designated meter read date, or you can switch multiple times within a traditional bill period. Pennsylvania and Maryland have implemented these things. So you could actually be served by multiple suppliers within a traditional bill period. You need to understand why enrollments fail and what's the remedy to get them fixed. And there are lots of different error codes and things that can come back through the EDI transactions that will give you a good idea as to what's wrong with them. You need a good process to monitor and decode those and turn them into action. So those are the understanding if there's a rescission period and if you can cancel enrollment and different things like that. In each of these, there will have a different process perhaps in each state.
Okay, great. So why don't we move on now to talking about marketing material and scripts. Madelon, let's lead on this one.
Yeah, again, don't want to scare anybody, but, I mean, this is a reality. And, you hate to see companies get in trouble because they did not have the required marketing scripts in place, or they didn't have any scripts at all. I mean, some states specifically require you to have scripts, and then there's a question and the commission asks you to turn over all your marketing scripts. That's an embarrassing thing to, come back and say, we don't have any, we don't use them. So, understand in the state what the marketing requirements are. And in here, we can probably go to the next slide. We're talking about, different kinds of whether is it a telemarketing call or is it door-to-door. And, there's all kinds of requirements of what kind of representations or misrepresentations. I mean, hi, we're marketing here on behalf of the utility. You don't want that included in your marketing script. If you're making savings promises, be careful. Really have somebody look over your marketing scripts because there's rules in every state by sales channel as to what you need to have in your scripts. And again, we do that whether it's direct mail, door-to-door. We've got taken the rules and broken it down. These are the requirements. This is what needs to be included. You just want to make sure that, whether you go through the rules or you do something like this or create your own way to make sure you've got a process to monitor and to make sure that your scripts are compliant with the state you're about to enter.
Okay, and could you talk about where in the process the supplier is when they are creating these documents and having them reviewed?
Yeah, I mean, typically, even while you're getting licensed, I would, definitely start looking at them and, starting preparing. I mean, at that time, okay, we're going to be doing, door-to-door and telemarketing. I would definitely start looking at what's required, what do we need scripts, and, all of the other things. So you can begin that, while you're sitting there waiting for the commission to get back to you, after you filed the application. There's nothing stopping you from, and I would strongly encourage you to start looking at all of these different rules, depending upon which, sales channel you want to use, and make sure that you're, getting a very good handle on all of those requirements.
All right, great. So why don't we now move on to talking about training?
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. And again, now there's a lot of states that actually require training. And not only do they require training, they ask to, they can ask to see it. And not only, okay, show us your PowerPoints, show us or whatever you're using, and show us who took the class. Show us on what date. Did you give them a test? And so just make sure you understand what the rules are in that state. Are there specific training requirements? And again, even if the state's rules are silent on training, if you run into a couple customer complaints, you don't want to come back to the commission and they say, show us your training. You say, what training? We don't do training. I mean, you don't want to be able to say that, and you want to be able to say, yes, we've got training by market. And I want to really emphasize, and we're talking about internal employees as well as your vendors. Remember, the supplier is responsible for all of the vendors' activities, whether or not, they've decided to hand it all over to the vendor. And even some states have very specific rules if you use a vendor that you have to have processes in place. We'll talk about that a little bit later, about monitoring it. But I also really want to emphasize both your customer care and your contract management team. I mean, they've got to be trained, especially your customer care, because they're the interface with the commission, and they want to know the rules. They don't want to get a customer complaint, and the commission saying, hey, why did you charge these 3 customers? They've moved. And you say, oh, well, we've got an ETF in our contract, so we can charge them all of this. And the commission says, well, wait a minute. In our state, we have a rule where if they move, you cannot charge them an ETF. And so it's really important. As a customer care team, unfortunately, there's a huge burden on them because they have to know almost all of these rules because of any complaint that comes in. And, this is the only way, I tell companies, this is the only way commissions really have any insight into your company. It's through the customer complaints. So it's really critical that your customer care team, same with your contract management team, they've got to know these rules. So are they sending the renewal notices out on time? Is the renewal notice including the proper information? Are you sending 2 notices? And did the notice include on the envelope, important notice about your contract expiration? I mean, the commission in every state has very specific rules, so your contract management team wants to know that. There's also always enrollment and billing requirements. You want to make sure that those teams are trained as well. And, again, we prepare training. There's no requirement that you have to go to somebody else to do your training, but you want to make sure that you have somebody that's doing training, and most importantly, that the training is compliant with the rules. Because, I unfortunately have been in a position where I've been hired by law firms to help because a company is under investigation. And, I will say training is, in a lot of instances, is woefully inadequate. I mean, it's just like, this is not enough to just include, oh, here's the rescission period, and these are the utilities, and then it's all about the company. There's a lot of rules that they're not training on, and the commission starts asking about it, and they find themselves not in a great position to negotiate their way out of, the situation.
Okay, and Tom, would you like to talk a little bit about some training MarketWISE conducts?
Sure. Again, you want to take the opportunity to give your operation team as much training as you can before you enter the market. And, so what we do is when we're working with suppliers who are entering new markets, we try to encourage them to pull together a cross-functional team across all their different business groups and give everybody the detailed market training up front. Everyone comes away from that meeting on the same page with the same understandings. And because when you get into the throes of the entering the market, everybody is working full speed to just make things happen. And you've missed a great opportunity to get everybody on board before things start if you don't take advantage of training your team before you go into the market. Another aspect of training that I think is very important is that companies are constantly bringing new employees on board, and maybe they're college graduates that are coming in for their first job, or maybe they're very skilled people who have a very detailed understanding of a database or programming application that you're bringing in. Either case, these people come in and they're kind of expected just to merge into the workforce and learn it as they go. A couple of very basic, this is deregulated energy, electricity 101, gas 101, for people who are dealing with the EDI process. What is EDI? What is all this terminology that people are talking about in the marketplace? Who are the players? Utilities, suppliers, brokers, just spending a little bit of upfront time, bringing these people into your organization and making them very comfortable and able to contribute much faster. And so you really want to think about putting some of this in your onboarding programs for new employees.
All right, great. And now I think it's finally time to launch and go to market. So Tom, we've laid out all this groundwork. So now can you tell us what to do in terms of launching into the new market?
Sure. Let me try to go through this very quickly. This will be a hypothetical example that I'm sure never happened to anybody here and on the phone, but let's just say you decide to ignore everything we've just told you, and the boss calls a meeting and says, hey, it's February, we're going to enter a market, we want to be into it in July, and so everybody go do what you need to do. Well, okay, typically there's a kickoff meeting. First meeting is kind of disbelief that we're going to do this and it's going to be done in this time frame, a lot of complaining. People walk away with assignments. Maybe the second meeting comes along and it's like half of the participants from the first meeting weren't available. 50% of the people who showed up actually had some time to do some research. Not a lot of progress. The project manager is already a little bit nervous. So this continues. The COO may need to get involved, come do a reboot of this project, tell everyone we were really serious about this. We really want to enter this market and, everybody dig in and get it done. So the project gets kicked off. Let's say they decide they're going to go into Pennsylvania and, okay, we'll just do what we did in our last market. We'll go into all the markets with the rate ready, purchase of receivables, and we know how to do that, so let's get going. And, oh, by the way, I think sales was really interested in going into the Philadelphia area, so let's concentrate there. Well, a week down the road, someone realizes, hey, TICO doesn't do rate ready. We don't have the ability to do this. So, well, what do we have to do? I thought our EDI provider would take care of this. Well, they can, but our applications need to be able to send them detailed line items to create the invoices. We can't do that. Oh, geez, all right, let's put Philadelphia on hold. We'll call that phase 2, okay? Let's move ahead with some of the other ones. We could go to Pittsburgh, we could do this. All right, good. Oh, you know what? Upon further discovery, in order to get tested for EDI, there's a 30-day requirement ahead of the testing period, and we just missed it. So now we're 3 months out before we can get tested for EDI. Oh, who's going to go tell the boss about that? All right, so this goes on, and you see that how these unexpected things turn into major hurdles that need to get over, and as you go through this, the timeline is racing out forward. You're losing time. You're beyond the projected implementation date. Everyone's working hard. You're up to phase 1, 2, and 3 with all these different things. You get into October and November, you deliver a small portion of what was expected. Everyone's exhausted and nobody's happy and nobody's satisfied with it. So when you go and you learn these things as you go and the problems are brought back to the team and the project needs to constantly be adjusted for them, this is how you end up with a project that meets no one's expectations and it took twice the time. So just a hypothetical situation I'm sure nobody has had to deal with.
And so what should that process look like then?
So in dealing with all of these different processes up front, as Madelon has gone through a bunch of these things, and we've been able to put some numbers on what some of these things should take, and so it's all about putting together a good project plan that reflects reality and how long these different things take. And so, by doing that upfront thing, investigation, you can come up with and come up with a project plan that is workable and that people can depend on. Okay, and the other thing that you need to understand is no matter how good you are in this planning, there are going to be some things that are perhaps missed, okay? And as you go through this, you need to be prepared as an operations team to put an extreme focus on your first 2 billing cycles, okay? If you have enrollments failing, you want to find out why those are failing, you want to address them, you want to get to the root cause of that. You know, somebody was collecting information from bills and they pulled the wrong account number off of the bill. That's why they're not going through, something like that. You want to monitor meter reads. You thought everything got enrolled, but you have no meter reads for a portion of the accounts. Well, chase down the missing meter reads. You know, they're either not enrolled or there's a problem with the meter or something. Don't let them linger. Don't let them cross multiple bill periods. You know, monitor complaints and things coming in from customer service. Don't let them get to the point where you have dissatisfied customers filing PUC complaints. Put extra special vigilance on those first 2 billing periods and remove the long-term problems.
All right, great. And let's just take another minute to talk about some ongoing needs after the market entry is completed. So why don't we start off with some compliance monitoring processes.
Yeah, and this is really important. I mean, there's a lot of different compliance monitoring. I mean, you're going to have to be, filing the necessary reporting requirements and that. But I will note that in a lot of states now, they require companies to put monitoring processes in place. And you actually have to submit that upon request, So you want to make sure that you have these processes. You want to make sure they're documented. And really, it's going to ultimately lead to better customer service. I mean, if you're monitoring, making sure, it's basically part of your quality assurance. Not only are you following the rules, but you're making sure that the agents are saying and doing what they're supposed to, and your employees are understanding and doing that. So just make sure you put a monitoring process. I've seen a lot of companies oftentimes do great training, and they've done a lot of work on the sales scripts, and they're really ready to go. But then people change jobs, you get busy, and you forget to monitor. And, if you monitor too, the most important thing is you start to find areas of problems, whether it's a billing problem or whether it's an agent problem or whether it's, whatever. So it's very, very important to have a monitoring process in place.
Okay, and Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about what MarketWISE does for an ongoing basis?
Sure. We participate in all the EDI, EBT work group that meet normally monthly, bi-monthly, or as needed when a big project comes up. And we stay on top of those things. We provide our clients with a monthly meeting in which we tell them everything that happened in any of those meetings or any other sources of information that we got that needs to be adjusted for them to stay compliant.
Okay. And Madelon, what about Etch?
Yes, I mean, Etch, definitely we follow all the state regulatory requirements and the utility changes that are happening. And so it's really important that you keep up to date. We update any products. We, happy to provide different, we've got newsletters for folks to follow all of the changes. And, as I said, we've got a lot of documents out there really geared towards making you aware of the requirements so you can easily do it yourself, make sure that you understand the requirements. But it's so important because you got to monitor, and this will mitigate your risk substantially.
Okay, thank you both so much. We've reached the end of our content today. Again, if anybody does have any questions, you can ask them in the GoToWebinar chat box there. We'll be happy to answer those. But just want to thank everybody for taking some time to be with us here today, and thank Tom and Madelon for sharing their expertise with us today. And I'll just give a second here for any questions to come in. We did have a couple throughout the presentation, so I'll start with those. And Madeline, maybe you want to start with this one, and Tom, you may want to weigh in too. But why are the standards so different from state to state?
Okay, yes. I mean, it would be nice. It'd make everybody's life so much easier if they were the same, whether at the utility level or at the commission level. But from the commission perspective, usually there's a legislative bill that's passed, and so the commission is given the authority to implement the rules, and they will vary by state, and there is a way to, to be able to influence that a bit, like when they're trying to develop the rules. If there's some rules that you like in another state, certainly participate in that process. But in general, I mean, it's going to be governed by the state and the rule or the law that's been passed to implement new changes in the competitive choice rules.
Okay, thank you so much. And is there anything being done to standardize across states?
I mean, I think I kind of mentioned just a little bit about, it's really important to participate in these rule makings and workshops, because you have a great opportunity to influence the outcome of those rules. Commissions are asking for input, and so you have an opportunity to say, hey, we've got experience in Maryland, we like this particular set of rules, for example. I mean, the same thing can happen at the utility level, where they're having these working groups, and, that's your opportunity to come in and say, hey, this works really well in this other jurisdiction, why not consider it? And so I think it's so important, whether you use a company like MarketWISE or Etch, or you've got a law firm, or you've got a regulatory team where you can go to these meetings, absolutely participate in them, because you have a huge chance to influence that.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just remind everybody again that if you would like to receive the slides from this presentation, we are offering those. Just feel free to shoot us an email. You should just be able to reply to your webinar invite, and we'll get those slides out to you. We'll hang on the line for just another minute in case somebody else has any other questions they wanted to ask. But otherwise, thank you so much for your time today again, and thank you, Tom and Madeline. And we want you to know that MarketWISE and Etch are both here to help you out in whatever steps of this process you guys may be going through right now. So don't hesitate to reach out to us to just get some advice on how to tackle your next market entry project. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.